Chapter 5 of The Dirt Bike Racer. I worked on Saturday morning till noon, then went back in the afternoon, worked till 4. Mr. Perkins gave me my first paycheck and said he would expect me on Monday morning at 8 o'clock sharp. I told him that my father was going to take me to the Social Security office early Monday morning to apply for my Social Security card. So would it be 9 o'clock okay? He said, sure. Just before I started to leave, a snazzy, lemon-coloured sports car pulled up along curving driveway and parked in front of the house. Mark Laverne stepped out of it. Hi, Mark, I greeted him pleasantly. He didn't answer. He only waved. It was just a brief gesture at that. He doesn't like me, I thought. I wondered why he was jealous because I was working for his uncle. Did he want the job? Did he feel he was better than me because he didn't have to work? I doubted it. I felt sure that it was something else. But what? I rode away on my bike, feeling his eyes prodding me in my back. Suddenly, I saw Tony riding down the street, heading towards me. I waited for him. Hi, working buddy, he called, grinning. You cleaning up? In more ways than one, I said. I showed him the cheque. That ought to buy me some parts, and I'm working Monday too. No way, that's great, he exclaimed, smiling. I mentioned Mark Laverne. I don't think he likes me, I said. Why not? I don't know. I have a feeling he might be jealous that I'm working for his uncle, but I don't know why he should be. Heck, if he's driving a sports car, he should have all the money he needs. Don't worry about it, said Tony. That evening, Tony and I went to a bike store and I bought some of the parts that were on my list. A spark plug, batteries, lights, bolts. They were all simple to install, but Tony helped me. After our family's big dinner on Sunday, Tony and I rode our bikes to Turtleback Hill dirt track. There were races going on all afternoon, starting at 1 o'clock, and with the minis racing first, and then bigger class bikes afterwards. I wanted to see the minis especially because that was the class I would be entering once I got my bike running and accumulated some experience under my belt. Turtleback was about 3 miles outside Aldell. Once my mini bike was ready, I'd have to get my father to cart it there. Since riding minis on the streets wasn't illegal, I had found that out. Turtleback Hill was more than just a hill. It was a series of hills. The track went up and over them like a roller coaster, with trees and shrubbery between. It was operated by a man named K.C. Jones, who owned the track and the land it was on. Tony pointed him out to me as he went by an open tent. There was a long table under it, with half a dozen boys and girls standing under it, looking over a man's shoulder at a list he had in front of him. He was small and had a short haircut. He kid rides too, explained Tony. The place was crowded with riders, bikes and bike enthusiasts. There were even a hot dog, soft drink concession stand. We heard the final call for the first mini race and got up to the fence near the starting line to watch. About 20 bikes were entered. For a while the roar was deafening as each rider revved up his engine, warming it up for the race. Finally, the starter fired the gun and the bikes took off. I felt my eyes bulging out of my head as I watched head for the high hill. Then they climbed it, dirt flying from behind their rear tyres as they clawed and gouged at the ground. I pictured myself in that crowd. One of these days, I thought. How long is the track? I asked Tony. 1 3/10 miles, he said. This will be 3 laps, I think. After the bikes vanished over the hill, we hurried over to another section of the track and watched the rest of the race from there. It was a 3-lap race all right, and a kid with a Honda 80cc won it. We hung around and watched the other races. Lugmanier and Skitch Bentley were entered into the 125cc's, but neither came anywhere close to winning their heat. We finally left at 5 o'clock. Early on Monday morning, my father got my birth certificate and took me to the Social Security office, where I applied for my card. It was a good thing I had my wallet with me and my library card in it, because I also had to present an identification with my signature on it. It would take a while before I got the card, but what a feeling! I was almost a full-fledged member of the USA's working class. My father dropped me off at home, then drove on to work. I rode my bike to Mr. Perkins' house. Ollie was still out with the flu, recuperating, I imagined. It was during the afternoon, when I was trimming the shrubbery, that I heard a soft sound behind me. I turned. It was Mrs. Kennedy, and with Mr. Perkins. She smiled. "Ronnie, Mr. Perkins would like a chat with you," she said. "Hi, Ronnie," he said cheerfully. "How are you doing?" "Just fine, Mr. Perkins." "Good. OK, Guinevere, you can leave us gentlemen alone now, and don't worry about me. I'll find my way back." "And you will," she said to me. "All he has to do is turn his head until his nose points towards the kitchen." "Guinevere, you talk too much," Mr. Perkins snorted. "Get on with you, will you?" She winked at me and left her dress swirling around her skinny legs. "Ollie won't be in till Wednesday, but I'd like you to give him a hand once or twice a week, if you don't mind," said Mr. Perkins. "Say Tuesday and Friday afternoons? That OK with you?" "Sure is, Mr. Perkins," I said. I told him I had applied for my Social Security card, and he was glad to hear it. "Well, how is your bike coming?" he asked. "Great. It just needs a few more parts on it, and it'll be ready to go." "That's fine. This boy, Mike somebody." He snapped his fingers as he tried to remember Mike's last name. "Mike Franco," I said. "Yes." "He doing the work for you?" "Most of it," I said. "He's got a bike of his own, and he knows bikes from one end to another. He's really putting mine in good shape for me." "Well, he'd better." He cleared his throat. "What are you doing right now?" "Trimming the shrubbery." "Time you cooled your heels a bit," he said. "Come on, let's sit under that old oak tree for a while. These legs of mine will kill me if I stand on them much longer." He pointed to a tall, ancient oak tree, as if he could see it. We walked to it and sat down on a wood bench that was built around it. The seat was smooth and shiny. I had a feeling that Mr. Perkins had spent a lot of time out there, living in this dark world and breathing in the cool, fresh air that came blowing in from the lake. "Guinevere says that you're doing a good job, Ronnie," he said. "I want you to know that I appreciate it." "Thank you, sir. You know, you're the first kid I've talked with in years." "That's hard to believe, Mr. Perkins." "Well, it's true. Since I've lost my sight, I've hardly been out of the house. I've become a recluse. No kids come to the house because they have no reason to, except for the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts, and then when they're selling light bulbs or cookies, something to raise money for the cause. Guinevere handles that anyway. I don't think I've talked with kids in 5 years. You're the first one." "What about your nephew, Mark Laverne?" I asked. "Mark? He just started coming around about a year ago. Just stays a few minutes, long enough to fill himself up with some of Guinevere's pies, then he leaves. We never sit down and talk, as you and I are doing now. In a way, I hardly know him, but I suppose I know him well enough." From what he said and the way he had said it, I figured that he wasn't too crazy about his nephew. "He's borrowed some money from me," he went on, "when he's afraid to ask his father, and I always give it to him. $10, $20, whatever. He's promised he'll pay it back some day, but I know he never will. Well, it's the only nephew I've got. Some day I hope he'll get a job and make enough money to buy what he wants. Hasn't he ever asked you for a job?" Mr. Perkins laughed. "You kidding? Anyway, I wouldn't want him. Neither would Ollie. Ollie has told me so. Mark doesn't believe in picking an apple off a tree. If someone would give it to him for free," he chuckled. "Hear that? Involuntary poetry." I smiled. "Pretty good," I said. We sat there, talking a little more about Mark and his father, who operated a taxicab business. Then Mr. Perkins rose from the bench, saying that his seat was getting to him. "Want your pay before you leave?" he asked me. "Do you need some money right away to buy more parts for your bike? You'll have to get wearing gear too, you know, a helmet, padded pants, boots, gloves. You'll need them, and it all takes money." "I know," I said, "but I haven't thought much about them. All I uppermost thought in my mind was getting my bike to run." "Come to the house before you leave," said Mr. Perkins. "I'll have Guinevere write you out a cheque." "Mr. Perkins, you really don't have to. I can wait till the end of the week." "Humbug!" he snorted. "You heard me. Be at the house before you leave." I was, and he paid me in full. For a rich guy, Mr. Perkins was the best. When I rode away from the house on my bike, I spotted a familiar car parked at the curb. It was Mark's lemon-coloured sports car, and Mark was sitting in it. His face was in the shadow, but I knew he was looking intently at me. I figured on waving him as I got closer, but as I approached, he started up the car and began easing it away from the curb, and then he gunned it. End of chapter 5.